I enjoy reading horror and fantasy novels, added with an interest in supernatural things because something unexplainable happened to me once. I experienced a horror story as a child. I had thought about it a lot over the years. This story had been buried in my heart incredibly. Before talking about my story, I would like to tell you about something that happened at my grandma's house when I was little. My grandmother's house was in the countryside and was surrounded by huge mountains. The livelihood of the people there depended on the resources of these mountains, so the villagers there often went to dig mountains. The people there extracted all kinds of rocks and sand from these mountains. Therefore, it was easy to see holes of different sizes in the areas that had been mined. When it started to rain, the holes would be full of water. People were unaware of the depth of these holes and danger that lurked inside of them. The children at the foot of the mountain often went up there to play for fun. Among those children, the one who was the bravest often chose the deep holes for swimming. A couple of kids in the village who lived near my grandmother's house decided to go check it out. But when it got dark, only the younger brother returned home. The boy told everyone that he did not know where his sister had gone. Everyone waited for a long time. It was getting dark, and the older sister still hadn't come home. The adults in the family felt very worried. They began to search for her inside and outside the village. Some people in the village at the time said they had seen the two sisters going up the mountain to play around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so they told the family about going up to the mountain to search for her. After hearing that, the adults in the family knew that a bad omen had appeared. They rushed to the quarry to look for the older sister. They started searching around the quarry and the holes. After searching for a while, the mother suddenly discovered something strange in the distance. The mother got a little closer to get a better look and saw her son's ball floating in the waterhole. With a premonition that something was wrong, the mother called some family members and rushed there to see what had happened. When they arrived at the hole and looked down, people could guess that this was the deepest hole because the bottom was not visible at all and the area of it was quite large. Once again, the mother saw something on a large rock by the hole. It was a pair of shoes, and those were probably her daughters. Immediately, a man jumped into the water to save the kid. After a long time and a lot of effort, the man was able to resurface with the girl in his arms. After being saved, the sister sadly passed away with her swollen stomach containing all the water she swallowed. The mother sadly broke down, experiencing the death of her child. Then, when the mother got home, she used a broom to sweep the house and then beat her son with it. She thought her daughter's death must have been the boy's fault, and she took it all out on him. Only at the time did the younger brother honestly explain what happened. That day, the younger brother and older sister played football very close to the hole. The ball was kicked out and the sister did not catch it. It fell into the hole. The younger brother was unsure of getting too close because of his mother's warning, so he begged his sister to go to the water to retrieve the ball. The older sister saw this and did not know how to handle it, so she had to go into the water to pick up the ball. As a result, the sister slipped and fell. Unfortunately, she couldn't swim. The older sister disappeared, and the younger brother on the shore was no longer seen. At that time, the younger brother was so scared that he rushed home without daring to tell everyone the whole truth. After experiencing these things, the holes in the mountains became dangerous places. The adults in the village often warned the children not to play near the holes. I was only in the 5th grade of elementary school. During the summer vacation that year, I was allowed by my mother to go to my grandmother's house to play. Whenever she saw me going out, my grandmother always told me not to go up the mountain and not to go near the quarry. I was at a naughty, playful age. How could I listen to my grandmother's advice? At first, I just threw rocks into the water, but soon realized that it was one of those holes. It was so deep that when a stone was thrown into it, it would no longer be visible. I threw one after another, and this time I threw it very hard into the water. Suddenly, I saw a special red carp appeared with a very large body. I didn't think much of it, but I thought I wanted to catch the fish, so I waded into the water. Meanwhile, I tried my best to be able to move forward, but I still couldn't catch that fish. Still, I wouldn't give up, and I tried my best. Unfortunately, my foot slipped and my whole body started sinking into the water. My body sank deeper into the water and I couldn't swim at all. I just struggled instinctively. But the harder I kicked, the deeper I sank. After a while, I couldn't swim anymore. At this point, I started drinking too much water, and gradually it overwhelmed me and my breath started leaving my body as I sank. I almost felt like I was about to die. And then I had the feeling that someone had saved me. I vaguely saw that it was the shape of a girl, and suddenly a very miraculous thing happened. I was lifted out of the water. Because I was so excited and quickly climbed ashore, after turning my head to look back, she disappeared. I was really confused and didn't know what had happened. My grandfather and grandmother suddenly appeared, and later I heard her say that when my grandmother was at home, she had a premonition that something bad had happened to me. So she came to find me. And in order not to be scolded, I lied to my grandparents that I was just hanging out near the hole when a girl pulled my leg down and I almost drowned. As a result, my grandparents did not scold me, but only comforted me, saying that I still had great luck, or else I would have been taken down by the girl to take her place and be a ghost for the rest of my life. Although many years had passed, I still did not have the chance to tell the truth to anyone, the truth I had hidden for so many years. All I wanted to do was to thank the girl who saved me and apologize for blaming her, as well as all the tragedy she had to endure. Last winter, I had an appointment to go to the hometown of one of my college club members. That night, we went to his village skating rink to try this new sport. The three of us tried ice skating together to see who had finished the first. Near the finish line, everyone tried their best to speed up to show their bravery and win for themselves. In the end, I was the runner-up and my friend in the group came first, while the host came in last. We both rested and talked happily, but we had no idea what was going to happen. Just a moment later, my best friend suddenly stood up and walked forward with a dazed attitude. We tried to call him, but he refused to turn back and just went straight to a certain point. He passed through people skating in front of him, towards the pine forest nearby. After a while, he tripped over a large ice hole and immediately fell into it. The two of us stood far away and saw the scene. We panicked and shouted to get everyone's attention and help. Immediately, the people around also rushed over and gave us a hand to save our friend. At this time, my friend's whole body was cold and heavy. It took 2 strong men to carry him to safety. His whole body was shaking. Fortunately, he still survived, but there was still something very panicky, he felt. We quickly dressed him up and took him home. After a while, he regained his composure and said that he didn't accidentally fall down. Then he told us the whole story, the reason why we went to that cold water hole and fell down like that. He said that, at the time, he saw in his eyes that he was trying his best to catch up with the two of us in front. Right at that moment, he saw a shadow passing by his side in a very strange way which attracted his attention. My friend turned to see in the cold, faint ice. He saw a boy about 15 years old with a thin body looking at my friend and smiling. My friend didn't think too much. He just felt that the boy was a bit strange in such cold weather. The boy wasn't dressed up properly. But in that moment, my friend was hypnotized. He lost his mind and didn't know anything anymore. After that, my friend just followed behind the boy. He didn't know that the strange boy was swimming in the cold water below the ice. At the waterhole where the incident happened, that strange boy was below and called my friend's name. That made my friend look like an idiot with his feet on the surface of the hole. Immediately my friend was awakened by the cold water, but everything turned out to be more terrifying than he could ever imagine. In front of him now there was no longer the boy he saw, but instead a dead corpse with both eyes falling out. This made the two of us feel both worried and scared after seeing this incident. We didn't know what horror stories would happen after this. That night, we went out to sleep. The whole family of the friend in the accident also began to gather to discuss how to solve this horror story. It seemed that after hearing the story and the location of the accident, his family members were extremely worried. That night, while everyone was discussing, my friend chose a corner of the house to sit and start saying very strange things. He started saying reproaches to his loved ones, recounting stories from his father's youth in a voice filled with disappointment. When his father heard it, he was immediately scared, got up and walked towards his place. His whole body was shaking. But my friend kept muttering strange words. He spoke in a completely different voice from usual and recounted the story that his parents had been lent money by a relative to repair the house in great detail. The stories he had told his parents were all stories that had happened to two people at the time when he wasn't even born. His father couldn't say anything else but stood stunned looking at him, and he stood up, his eyes wide with anger, his face full of fear. Then he glanced at his father and shouted loudly, blaming his father for why he did not help him when he was in trouble. Only now did his father know that the person in his body at that time was his brother who died a long time ago, also at the same place where he crashed. His whole family was shocked by this. At first his family thought he was playing pranks on them until he said the name of the deceased. His family's uncles began to look at each other in fear. Everyone knew that since this man died, no one in the family had mentioned this name anymore. Everyone who was present in the accident that year had to stand up and beg the soul in its body for forgiveness for letting him die in such a painful way. Everyone explained that, at that time, no one knew that he had an accident because he was so in love with skating. Until they couldn't find him, he began to look for him. But he was found dead. Faced with the sincere words of his brothers, the soul in the body did not want to make it difficult for its family. Each pain began to subside and the eyes also decreased somehow. After a while he fell silent and then staggered, finally falling to the ground. His whole body was cold and somehow less heavy than before. His parents went over to pick him up. Everyone remembered the old story, but in their hearts couldn't hide their emotions because they remembered their lost loved one. That unexpected incident was finally resolved. My friend also regained his sanity, but still couldn't stop panicking because he didn't know what had happened to him. I personally experienced this event, and it was the most terrifying memory that I would never forget. I relocated to the city in 2008 to begin my first year of college. I shared a dorm room with Chow, a buddy from our hometown. I wanted to go to the beach to play after cleaning the room, so I asked Chow, "Hey, do you want to go somewhere? Or let's go to the beach for a walk." But because Chow packed so much luggage, he didn't completely tidy his stuff and didn't want to go out, so I had to go out by myself. As a person who lived in the highlands, I had a great desire to see the sea, and I registered in this institution because I wanted to live near the water. When I arrived at the beach, gorgeous views exceeded my expectations. I didn't anticipate the sea to be this beautiful, and everything transpired in front of me as if it were a dream. The chilly sea breeze rushed past. I was able to see numerous flocks of seagulls soaring around, which felt fantastic. The sound of the sea crashing on the coast, followed by the sound of powerful waves, gave me a completely different sensation than that enormous rivers I've witnessed. The huge sandy beach and the raging waves created an experience that was difficult to express by words. My soul was now soothed in peace. It was also late afternoon and numerous seabirds and seagulls were chirping and flying around. I still didn't want to leave. The water had sucked me in, so I strolled east on the smooth sand. There were a few huge boulders, so I took off my shoes and sat on one, looking out at the lovely seascape. The setting sun painted the water surface a brilliant crimson color. All of them were in such a harmony. That gorgeous ocean made me forget about time. Everything appeared to come to a halt. I sat for more than 2 hours in such awe-inspiring surroundings. I didn't get up and go until the sun had completely set and the night sea wind made me feel cold. But at this very time, I discovered a serious problem. Something piqued my interest. Many beaches and coral reefs behind me had vanished. How come they just vanished all of a sudden? It made me so curious. Then I realized that the sea fluctuated with the tides and tide level might be high by now. I was standing on this reef watching the waves rise higher and higher behind me. I calmed myself and looked cautiously, gently getting into the water and saw that it was already up to my waist. Concerned that the tide might rise even sooner, I hastily raced to the coast, walked into the sea without caring about my clothes getting wet, and discovered another problem. I thought the waves would simply soak my pants a bit, but with only a couple more waves hitting me, drenching my entire body, I found a large cut on my foot. But I couldn't worry too much at the moment since I was so terrified and my foot was bleeding, so I hurried up to the coast. I attempted to run as fast as I could back to my dorm, trembling from the cold. Fortunately, after a few minutes, I arrived. Did you go to view the sea or did you take a swim? You're drenched! Chow inquired, seeing that I was soaking wet. But when he spotted me passing by, he suddenly became terrified. He was trembling, a look of horror on his face, and he pointed at me, stammering, Behind you! Why is there a woman behind you? Chow claimed there was a woman with long hair wearing yellow clothes sitting on my back. It was quite an unpleasant feeling, but I didn't realize there was anything heavy on me. Which woman? Are you sure? Chow? I unconsciously looked back after hearing Chow's remarks, and there was nothing behind me. Chow sat up uneasily, looking behind me and seeing nothing. He couldn't believe he was wrong because the woman's form was clearly visible. I merely told Chow that perhaps I caught a cold from the seawater, so I went to bed early to relax. What I believed was a cold turned out to be a virus that could have killed me if it hadn't been identified in time. I overslept that day. I developed a high fever, couldn't get out of bed for 2 days, and experienced agony all over my body after taking the medicine which scarcely worked. My classmates rushed me to a hospital near the school for emergency treatment. I still have a high fever after 3 days of infusion in the hospital, and my classmates were quite concerned. They wanted to inform my parents so that they could come to take care of me. Fortunately, on the 4th day, I was gradually improving. The fever was still present, but my mind felt much better. But that day, Chow observed something that startled him while watching TV in the school infirmary, as I was still chatting to the guy next to me. A woman's corpse discovered in the sea. A drowning accident was being reported on a local TV news show. It came out that the foreign female was trapped on the beach and died because of falling into the sea. A week later, her body was discovered on the beach, and the place where the body was discovered was where I was stuck that day. Even worse, Chow noticed that the girl on TV resembled the girl whom I carried on my back the other day, who had long hair and wore yellow clothing. Chow didn't complete his statement, but I had a feeling I knew what had happened. Could it be that the rock I was sitting on that day was where the girl died, and when I fell into the water, I became ensnared by the girl's ghost? I wasn't sure whether that was the case, but I didn't dare to think about it, so I told myself to try to forget. I didn't know if it was a coincidence, but when the girl's corpse was picked up, my condition progressively improved. For the following 4 years of my academic career, I went to the beach to enjoy the lovely landscape, but I also realized that the water, although beautiful, was also quite hazardous. This is the story of Yun, who was a hobbyist at night fishing. As soon as he had time, Yun would immediately go fishing to relax because the studying was very stressful and the work schedule was hectic. Next to Yun's place, there was a big hydroelectric dam. There were a lot of fish, and it also was very quiet. Every week, Mr. Yun went there to night fish. Yun said he wouldn't need a wife or anything else if he was given a fishing rod and bait. He was truly a fishing maniac. One day, while preparing to go under the dam to fish, suddenly Yun heard someone's sobs. Turning around and looking around for a moment, he saw 3 people sitting, burning paper money and offering fruit. They also turned to look at him. They must have wondered why people still came to this desolate place at this hour. They were crying furiously, looking very sad. Yun didn't know what was going on either. Yun was also a bit curious, but he thought he shouldn't care about other people's business like that. So, he picked up his fishing gear and started to go to a lower place next to the water to make it easier to fish. He took the bait from his pocket and hooked it on the hook. After finishing preparing, Yun glanced up. He saw that the 3 people from earlier had also packed up and started to leave. That day, the water surface was very smooth. A few hours had passed. Yun still hadn't caught any fish, but he was still patiently waiting. It was getting darker and darker, and now only Yun was there. That day was Yun's worst day of fishing, as more than 3 hours had passed without any fish, leaving him a bit depressed. Yun pulled out his phone from his pocket, intending to play some music to ease his boredom. But Yun still had no intention of going home because he was determined to catch 1 fish at least today. Suddenly, Yun heard a noise behind him, causing him to quickly turn around to look. There seemed to be a shadow of someone where the 3 people burned the banknotes a while ago. Yun thought to himself, could someone still come to burn paper money at this time? Why so late? Out of curiosity, Yun stood up and took a flashlight he always carried with him when fishing at night and shined at the shadow, and in the dim light of the flashlight, it appeared to be a child. The child was reaching out to take fruit from the place where the three peoples burning money paper earlier and eating it deliciously. Hearing a noise, the child jumped, turned to look at Jan and quickly ran away. Well, right now, Mr. Jan was adjusting the flashlight to shine further so that he could see the child's face and plan to talk to him. He wanted to know why the child was still outside, like this, because it was late at night. But after adjusting the flashlight, Jan looked back to the place where the child was, and the child was no longer there. Jan felt a bit strange at this moment, because he had encountered some unusual things tonight. No one ever came to this dam the night before. After thinking for a while, he intended to turn to clean up the fishing tools and come back home. But at this moment, his fishing rod suddenly became heavy. It was impossible to pull up. Jan shined his flashlight on the hook and saw a dark shadow peeking out from under the water. That made him happy because he thought there was finally a harvest today. Then he quickly took some more bait from the toolbox, rounded it up, and threw it at the hook. The purpose was to lure the fish to stay still without struggling to escape. When going fishing at night, the buoy attached to the hook also had a light on it. As soon as Jan threw the bait in that direction, the float began to move. Then, something black began to emerge from the water. At that time, Jan thought maybe he had bad luck with trash. The strange object rose higher and higher. Jan started to shine a flashlight on it to see what he ended up catching, something so heavy. But when he reached there with the light, what was in front of him made him gasp in horror. What Jan caught was a human head. To be precise, a child's head. Its skin was pale and rotting, and it looked horrible. Suddenly its pupils moved, and it stared at him with a monstrous smile on its lips, wide from ear to ear. That made Jan panic and fell backwards without being able to get up to run. It was the first time in his life that he encountered such a scary thing. His whole body was exhausted. At that time, Jan could not hold the flashlight steady, causing it to fall onto the ground. Whether by coincidence or by chance, the flashlight fell on the ground. It shined the light towards the child's head. It wasn't just a head now, but half of its body was sticking out of the water. The child's body contorted. It was worth mentioning why that child would stand on the water like that. Then, the child slowly raised one hand, then looked towards the frightened Jan in the distance. The child slowly waved and called out to Jan, his mouth grinning monstrously, his skin so rotting that it could be seen from afar. At times like these, anyone would be extremely scared and try to run away. But for some reason, Jan unconsciously just wanted to follow the child's call. Then, Jan suddenly stood up again and walked into the direction of the ghost child. Jan couldn't control his body and mind at that time. He just wanted to go fast to get there with the child. One step, then two steps. Jan walked slowly like a puppet being controlled. He went near the water. No one knew he was there, and this dam was very big and the water was extremely deep. Suddenly at that moment, Jan's chest felt like it was hit by something, making him suddenly wake up from that pain. At this moment, Jan seemed to have just come out of a dream. He hurriedly touched his chest and suddenly remembered that there seemed to be a necklace around his neck. The necklace was taken by his mother at the temple. He had always worn it with him since he was a child. When Jan took it out to see, the pendant was a broken image of Guanyin Buddha. This pendant was made of monolithic marble. There was no impact. Why did it automatically break like that? Now that he had calmed down, Jan realized that he only needed one more step to fall into the dam. Immediately, Jan hurriedly turned his back and ran towards his bicycle, still not forgetting to turn his head to look at the ghost child. Even though the night was dark, Jan could still see the child's angry expression. The child then slowly sank back into the water. Perhaps the child intended to use Jan's soul to take its place. Folks always said that water ghosts were people who died in the river or lake before their fate was reached. They need another person to take their place, so they could be reincarnated. After collecting fishing tools, Jan went straight to his bike without daring to look back at the dam again. He was afraid that if he would be fascinated by the child, he would suffer again. Jan ended up cycling straight to his friend's house nearby to sleep, still panicking in his heart. Since then, he never went night fishing again, because no one knew if such luck would come to him again or not. This scary story happened in a fishing village in China a few years ago. There was a woman who had been waiting for someone under the lighthouse at the pier for 7 days. She was the wife of Fang, a fisherman. On the day Fang set sail, his boat was suddenly hit by a storm and had not returned for 7 days. Although her son advised her to return home, the wife still waited there. Fang's wife had been waiting on the pier for 7 days now. Each time she was dragged home by her son to stop waiting. This village was a typical fishing village of Fujian province, China. The people were all fishing on the sea, so sometimes shipwrecks were inevitable. Finally, the bad news came on the 8th day. The son then panicked and ran to the reporter to tell his mother that he had seen Fang's body washed up on the beach. The wife had already guessed the outcome, but in her heart she still hoped that her husband would return safely. Fang's body was soaked in water for a long time, so it looked terrible when it washed up on the beach. Fang's corpse was densely covered with sea creatures such as sea clams and conches. These often attached themselves to dead bodies in the sea. The people saw this and immediately helped clean Fang's body from sea clams and conch and brought his body home for burial. Those sea snails adhered to the skin of the decomposing corpse. When the people pulled the snail out with his hand, the snail would bring a piece of meat or skin from the corpse. The people made great efforts to help. People brought the body back to the village, prepared it for burial. Most people in shipwrecks died in such a tragic way. Sea clams and conch were removed from Fang's corpse, still on the beach. After dark, a group of young people was walking by the beach. The sea was extremely cool but contained many dangers and death. These 3 young people all worked in town and turned back to the village at night to rest. That day they invited each other to go out to relieve stress. One of the groups, Han, found the sea clams and conches scattered on the beach. The group didn't know where the sea clams and conch came from, but these conches looked delicious. The rest of the group said, "These people are a waste. These delicious big conch are thrown here. This thing is a real bargain." So the whole group packed those snails and prepared them to bring home to cook and eat. The group did not forget to laugh happily because they accidentally caught delicious bait. The sky suddenly became pitch black, and clouds were gathering in the evening. The houses near the sea were quiet. The group went home to cook snails and make some small dishes, and then they started drinking. People lived near the sea that had one thing in common. They knew that the meat of this conch was very tender and juicy. This conch was large and had lots of meat. The young men pulled out the snail meat with a small toothpick. The snail was completely separated from the shell. The appearance was a little scary, but the meat was delicious. The conch was an expensive food in the city, therefore these young people couldn't ignore the immediate benefit. The group of young people used toothpicks to get the snail meat and ate happily. They looked like they were eating well. But only Han didn't eat any snails. "Why don't you eat it?" a young man asked Han. "I'm allergic to snails, so I can't try. You guys just eat it. I was scared when I looked at it," Han said. So the two remaining people gossiped and quickly ate all the conch. After eating, the group went to bed because it was past midnight. Because 3 young men were tired and had a little yeast in them, they slept soundly. Han also quickly fell asleep because he was too tired. Just sleeping for a while, Han was suddenly woken up by terrible screams. He still couldn't figure out where these screams were coming from because he was still sleepy. It turned out that one of his co-workers was sick. But isn't he sick? Han saw that person writhing in pain, his whole body arched, his whole body covered in a deadly gray. His stomach felt like something was moving. His belly was gradually bulging high, bulging like a pregnant woman. His belly was constantly expanding, the underbelly was twisting back and forth, looking very scary. Han was frightened by the sight and immediately went to his friend's bed to help him. At that time, there were also screams of pain from behind. Han wondered what had happened again. Han looked back. His other friend was also in great pain, to the point of kneeling on the bed. His whole body had blue veins, so painful that he gnashed his teeth as if he couldn't stand it anymore. Han did not dare to delay when he saw the situation. He immediately ran out to find a doctor. After a while, Han found a doctor who had been working in the village for more than 30 years. When the doctor arrived, Han's 2 friends passed out from the pain. The 2 of them looked like they were dead. Han looked at them with fear. The doctor said they had eaten something unclean. That was why it happened. Han told the doctor about these 2 eating the conches tonight. "We picked up some conch and mussels today. The 2 of them ate them," Han told the doctor. After listening, the doctor told Han about the terrible origin of those conches. Han's face paled from fear. The doctor said that conch and mussels were the things that contained the evilest spirits in the sea. They like to suck the yin gas of the dead. If we eat them a lot, they would be very harmful to our health. After that, the doctor went to get a bunch of sticky rice to soak in water. This way was a cure for conch poisoning. The doctor asked Han to give his water to his friends to drink so 2 friends could recover from their illness. After being poured a lot of sticky rice water into their mouths, the other 2 started vomiting madly. The scary thing was that the spit out conch meat was not completely digested, still intact with the shape of the conch. In ancient times, it was believed that conches and sea mussels could absorb yin and form pearls. Most sea snails and mussels were not very clean creatures at all. It occurred in 2013 while I was a student. There is a fairly clear river right next to the hostel where we live. We're all from the country and we've been swimming in rivers since we were kids, so when we saw this one, we knew we had to jump in.
Aniko quickly undressed and began wading into the water. This individual appears to be looking forward to revisiting his childhood memories. Kane and I both went into the water shortly after. The river in the city isn't as clear and cool as the river in the country, but it still makes us happy. We swam for a while before starting to play in the water like we did in the country. If anyone happened to pass by, they'd probably think we had some kind of mental illness. There is a bridge near the river. Although bathing near the bridge would have been cooler, we never went because there was an underground current under the bridge that was dangerous. That day, I noticed someone swimming beneath the bridge. Aniko approached, intrigued by my surprised expression, and inquired as to what I was looking at. I stated that I saw someone swimming beneath the bridge. That area is extremely dangerous. If you slip, you could lose your life. After hearing this, Aniko and Kane became concerned as well, so the three of them looked at the water beneath the bridge at the same time. After a long period of observation, we determined that it was a girl. She, on the other hand, remained stationary and did not move. I couldn't see her face because it was so dark under the bridge. All I could see was her long hair floating in the water. Because Aniko and Kane suspected I was spying on the girl, they urged me to come over and strike up a conversation. I have a crush on a girl with long hair, but I can't talk to her naked. The three of us swam in the river until the sun went down before getting back. Before going back to the inn, I looked under the bridge to see if the long-haired girl was still there. For some reason, it was already getting dark, but she hasn't landed. However, I quickly left because I was afraid the girl would think I was sneaking around. Because the weather was still hot the next day, the three of us planned to go to the river to swim after school. Because it was extremely hot, I entered the water before Aniko this time. The two boys quickly dressed up and chased them down, but as soon as I stepped into the water, I noticed the long-haired girl I saw under the bridge the day before. Not only was I taken aback by the girl's appearance, but so were Aniko and Kane. This piqued everyone's interest. The long-haired girl from yesterday swam in only in one position and didn't even look back. Swim, but all three of us had the impression that the other girl was floating in the water. Aniko, who was always cheerful, began to be concerned. He didn't think this girl enjoyed swimming so much that she spent 2 days in the river. Kane also spoke up at this point. He had the impression that it was just a human head floating in the water, but Aniko and I both thought it was impossible because the water under the bridge was moving so quickly. If it had been a human head that couldn't stay put, it could have been swept away. After some deliberation, Kane came to the conclusion that it is best if we go under the bridge to find out what the truth is. Aniko and I both agreed on this point, so we made the decision to approach the other girl. Because I was the best swimmer of the three of us, I led the way to the fast water just to be safe. I couldn't see her face very well because it was quite dark under the bridge. All I could see was her very long hair and snow-white skin. I was afraid to approach her for fear of upsetting her. I only dared to stand back and try to call and ask from some distance. She did not respond, but instead slowly turned her head to follow the flowing water, and what happened right after that was truly terrifying. What we've seen since yesterday is a human head, and it's starting to decompose. Maggots are crawling from the eye sockets, nose, and mouth. I screamed in terror and backed away slowly. Aniko and Kane, who were swimming alongside, were both terrified. We three panicked and swam ashore, where we immediately called the police, who arrived to investigate the incident. It turned out that the head was tied to a large rock, which prevented it from moving at all. We were returned from some interrogation as a group of 3. Aniko, Kane, and I skipped dinner that night, unable to swallow the maggots crawling all over the girl's face. Perhaps because we were too shocked and tired to sleep that night, we all went to bed early, but the fear on our faces could not be hidden. That night, Kane and Aniko both had the same strange dream. This appears to be what the other girl was attempting to convey to us. We fantasized about the river road. It was evening and a girl with long hair was riding a bicycle. Suddenly, a dark figure leapt from the shore's grass and charged towards her. The girl screamed in terror, but no one heard her. To avoid everyone's gaze, the shadow pushed the long-haired girl and a bicycle into the grass. He used his hand to strangle the girl until the girl could no longer resist. I don't know what his purpose is to act like that. After killing the girl, the man tied her up and placed her body on the back of the bicycle. He then walked towards a water tower by the river, wondering what this perverted murderer was going to do with the poor girl's body. Looks like this isn't the first time he's killed someone. He calmly carried the girl's body to the top of the water tower. Then he put the girl down and stared at her body like he was contemplating his booty. After observing for a while, he bent down to pick up a large rock from the ground. Involuntarily, a mysterious smile appeared on his face. With an amused expression on his face, he used all of his strength to repeatedly throw the large stone at the girl's body. After the girl was dead, he broke her neck, severed her head, and placed her head in a black bag. He looked down at the river and chose the section with the fastest current. He then dumped the poor girl's head into the water. He tied the head with a large stone to prevent it from floating away. In the dream, I appeared to have transformed into that girl, and I felt myself falling into a stream of cold water. Through the water, I could even see the man's evil face. After committing so many sinful acts, he smiled contentedly. I tried to wake up because that dream was causing me so much pain as if I were a victim for myself. Everyone was drenched in sweat from the fear by this point. As soon as I opened my eyes, I noticed a swarm of maggots on my pillow. They confused me as to whether this was real or a dream. I immediately jumped up, panicked and howled because I was disgusted and nauseated. At this point, I realized that I was not the only one who had been awakened in this manner. Both Aniko and Kane are wearing the same expressions as me. Not only that, but the floor of the hostel is now full of water, much like the scene in my hometown on heavy rainy days. But this is the 7th floor of the dormitory. It was hard to believe. There are still long hairs floating on the floor's water, and we have no idea where they came from. I was curious, so I asked Aniko and Kane why they had gotten up so early. Their response made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. They wished for a girl like me. We've all had the same dream. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I became. So we went to the police station together and tracked down the officer who had questioned us that day. He didn't believe what we were saying, but luckily this cop was still in charge of the case. So he drove us down the river to see if he could locate the water tower we were discussing. There was indeed a water tower by the river, not far from where we used to swim. These water towers appear to have been abandoned for a long time. They are quite old, with many cracks on the outside. We drove past 3 water towers in a row, but none of them resembled the ones we saw in our dreams. The cop was getting frustrated because we couldn't figure out which tower it was, so he offered to drive us home. I, Kane and Aniko were all perplexed, but I still believe it's not a coincidence that all 3 of us had the same dream. Just as we were about to give up, Kane, who was sitting in the back seat, yelled and pointed out the window. When we looked in the direction he indicated, we found a ruined water tower just like in our dreams. So the cop and the 3 of us approached the water tower to observe, hoping to find clues to the case. The volunteer cop led the way with the 3 of us trailing behind. Strange things happened in quick succession, and we gradually lost our courage. As we got closer to the water tower, a strong stench rose up, making everyone want to vomit. The cop asked us to wait below while he climbed alone to inspect the top of the water tower. A headless girl's body was found above the water tower. Then, a large number of police and forensic officers arrived. I had an indescribable feeling when we were back in the police car, looking at the poor girl's body being brought down from the water tower. Although this incident was reported in the newspaper, we have always kept this strange dream a secret.
As I remember, this story began when I was only 7 or 8 years old. Back in my village, I used to play with Ben and Leo because not only were their houses next to mine, but we also got along very well. We often played by a pond, which was at the far end of the village, near the edge of the forest. One day, as soon as we got to the pond, we heard strange sounds coming from it, and we saw a lot of frogs, so we walked closer. Since we were young, we decided to throw stones at them. Watching the frightened frogs jump away, we laughed excitedly. Meanwhile, Ben was looking at something below the water, maybe because he didn't want to play our boring game. When I tried to throw a stone again, Ben told me to stop. He thought he saw a big fish underneath the water. When we looked down into the pond, we saw a fish swimming around a big, strange rock. It was the first time we saw this fish, or any fish for that matter. So we decided to get into the pond to take a closer look. But while we were about to jump into the pond, it suddenly started to rain, heavily. We were all surprised, because the day had quickly turned from a nice sunny day into a dark, stormy one. So we decided to run straight back home. That whole day, the rain kept falling. We stayed inside, for we couldn't do anything else in that weather. After the rain had passed, the air became cleaner, so we started our day as usual. Strangely, we felt uneasy, which seldom happened to us. The first person to get that feeling was Leo. He mentioned that he had a nightmare the previous night. Ben was next to comment about last night's dream. He made a serious and then awkward face. He had also had a nightmare that night. Leo believed that these bad dreams were because of the rain soaking us by the pond. But Ben disagreed. He stared into space with a blank expression. Then he said, "I dreamt of ghosts. It felt very real." I turned to look at Ben to ask him more about his nightmare. He quickly narrated what he had experienced in his dream the previous night. While trying to sleep, he got the urge to go to the bathroom. Half asleep, he got out of bed and went straight into the bathroom. Suddenly, as he reached for the toilet door, he felt a cold wind rush through his body. Ben was astonished when he saw what appeared to be a person coming out of the toilet. The person appeared gradually and became more visible. Ben panicked and shouted in horror. It was himself, or someone that looked like him. He froze in shock and was sure this would be the day he died. As he continued to observe the surreal event, the shadow walked past him. And, as it did, he felt clearly the eeriness and coldness coming from that weird entity. Then, slowly, the shadow moved into Ben's bedroom. He panicked, and his face turned pale from the fright. Composing himself, he decided to use the toilet first. Maybe it was just an hallucination, he thought. The next morning, before going to school, he wondered whether he should tell his parents what he had witnessed the night before. After thinking for a while, he decided to tell his parents about this figure that appeared in his bedroom last night. When his mother heard the story, she looked annoyed. She said, "Ben, you have watched too many horror movies. You are obsessed with them." Discouraged and unconvinced, He then said goodbye to his mother and went to school. After Ben had finished telling his story to us, I wondered why I didn't see anything strange like that. We were so caught up in our conversation that we didn't realize we had arrived at school already. That day at school was a tough one. I couldn't stop thinking about Ben's story. It was just so weird. During class, he kept yawning and falling asleep. He showed signs of sleep deprivation. In the late afternoon, the three of us were on our way back home after school. On the way home, we met a woman who was holding a little boy in her arms. As soon as the boy saw us, he pointed at Ben and cried out loud. Startled, we looked at the little boy, then quickly looked at Ben in confusion. I wondered why the child had looked at my friend and screamed. But Leo chuckled and patted Ben's shoulder. He said that maybe Ben's face was too fierce, and this had probably scared the child to tears. On the way home that day, we had to cross an alley that was quite empty. Suddenly, a dog jumped out and barked at us. He stared at Ben and growled. His eyes turned red and looked very ferocious. We became frightened. Our faces turned pale. We didn't know what to do. At that moment, I shouted, "Run!" So we immediately ran as fast as possible. After that day, Leo and I came back to check the dog out again. It was clear that the strange dog was only barking at Ben, and he didn't behave the same way when we went back. I knew Ben seemed to realize that too. His face expressed obvious concern. The next day, we ran straight to the pond which we had visited the day before. The place looked different after the rain. The air was cooler and clearer this time. When I looked at the bank of the pond, I was surprised. It seemed like something had changed. I pointed to the water and told my friends about it. Under the water, the rocks, which we had seen the day before, were gone. Instead, large pieces of wood, which had probably come from the bottom of the pond, were floating. Maybe yesterday's rain caused the water in the pond to rise up. Suddenly, Ben called us and pointed towards something which was drifting in the water. I turned back to see what it was. It was an old, damp piece of wood. There were 2 frogs sitting on it. They reminded us about the frogs that had been on the rocks the day before. Then Ben asked Leo to help him explore the piece of wood with him. Why had it appeared near this pond? They jumped on it. Then they imagined they were on a boat and started using a long branch as a paddle to row. Ben asked me to join them. He looked very enthusiastic. They immediately took the other branch to push their boat away from the bank. Suddenly, the boat turned and leaned to one side, which caused Ben to fall into the water. Leo was also startled and couldn't keep his balance, so fell too. While watching, I panicked. I saw Leo swim up from the water. His body was all wet. He tried to cling onto a piece of wood in front of him and gasped for breath. It was very hard for me to pull Leo out of the pond, but at last I did. Normally, this pond was quite shallow. Why did it seem so deep that day? Leo choked on water, but managed to tell me that he couldn't see Ben anywhere. I ran towards the pond and called for Ben in panic, but the water was very calm, as if nothing had happened just moments before. Everyone in the village went to this pond together to look for Ben after hearing the commotion. This pond was very shallow now, and strangely, not a trace of Ben could be found. The big piece of wood was also brought out of the pond. Some soil was still stuck to it. The log was moldy and slippery, and it seemed that was why they slipped. The villagers decided to bring pumps. They plugged the pipe to suck up all the water in the pond. There were about 3 or 4 pumps which worked at full capacity until the job was done. It took more than half a day for all the pumps to drain the water. Once drained, at the bottom of the pond, people found a large wooden coffin. All the villagers were instantly terrified. The coffin was upside down, but people realized immediately that the piece of wood was the lid of the coffin. Some strong young men stepped forward and used their strength to turn the coffin up. However, because of the dirt stuck to it on the bottom, it was extremely difficult to lift. After a while, they managed to overturn the coffin to its side. Everyone panicked because there was a body inside that resembled one of a child. I saw then that it was my friend, Ben. Everyone looked at each other with tearful eyes. It turned out that the reason why Ben's body did not emerge was because it was stuck in this coffin. No one knows how it happened, but many can imagine that it must have been something terrible and supernatural that held him down. After Ben's demise, everyone immediately spread the word, and no one dared to come to this pond ever again. It later turned into a large trash hole.
When the night fell, we once again sat down in a circle to hear the wonderful stories being told by my grandmother. That night, my grandma told us a scary story of a sea monster that loved to eat children. Needless to say, all of us were terrified yet curious at the same time. We asked her about its appearance, what the monster looked like. Was it long or short, or did it have many sharp teeth? Seeing us speaking chaotically, my grandmother told us to stay quiet and stop interrupting her mid-sentence, or else she would not tell us the story. We then told her that we would remain silent and not ask anything. Under the dim light, Grandma started narrating the story. It had happened 20 years ago, back in the day when misogyny was still a thing, as people had strong prejudice towards women. Out of curiosity, I asked my grandmother what misogyny was. She explained that it was the hatred for women or girls, as people had a tendency to respect men while disdaining women. My grandma raised a needle to my face, saying that she would sew my mouth up if I continued to interrupt her, then moved on with her story. That day, Mr. Kang's daughter-in-law had just given birth to a baby. However, he wasn't happy with it as he looked worried. The man had been thinking a lot, as his son and daughter-in-law were still struggling to have a baby after 10 years, and the fact that it was a baby girl made him feel truly upset. Thinking about the neighbors laughing at this new family when they found out about his new grandchild, the man felt even more disappointed. But anyway, he had to go check on his newborn grandchild. Having mixed feelings, Mr. Kang blankly gazed at the baby lying neatly in the arms of his son Ken, but the look on his face started changing as he smiled cheerfully. Turned out it was the adorableness of the baby that put a smile on him. Even though she was crying, yet she still looked as beautiful as an angel. Ever since that moment, Mr. Kang had a sudden change in his thoughts. He was no longer bothered about his grandchild being a boy or a girl. As he carried the baby in his arms, his eyes were filled with happiness as he named her Tani. As time went by, the baby had now become a little girl who was able to run and sing. One afternoon, as Mr. Kang was taking a stroll with his granddaughter, he bumped into an old friend of his who was also being with his grandchild. The man instantly bragged about his grandson as soon as he saw Mr. Kang. He later made some rude remarks about Tani. "Is this little girl your granddaughter? She looks lovely, but such a shame that she's not a boy." Mr. Kang was extremely annoyed by those ironic words from his friend. It wasn't the first time for Mr. Kang to deal with such unkind words, as he constantly heard people in the village saying bad things about his family. As Mr. Kang took his grandchild to go fishing, they encountered a group of people who were terribly rude to them. "If I were Mr. Kang, I would definitely strangle that little girl to death, right the moment she was born, since I couldn't stand being humiliated." The guy then bursted out laughing. Everyone knew that he was just making a joke, yet it made one feel extremely uncomfortable to hear it. Of course, Mr. Kang didn't care about those nasty words as the two kept going to the fishing spot. However, as the night had already fallen yet the two hadn't returned, Mr. Kang's wife and son hurriedly went to the riverbank searching for them. But there was just a hook, an empty bucket, and a fish spotted at the scene, while Mr. Kang and Tani were nowhere to be seen. The two called out their names loudly, but received no reply. A while later, the couple saw a figure appearing in the middle of the river. It seemed like Ken's mom had figured out who it was. She immediately panicked. Ken quickly ran to the spot as he got closer. He gradually understood what was happening. Turned out that the one in the river was Mr. Kang. Ken and his mother quickly asked him about Tani, but Mr. Kang just remained silent to their question as he lifelessly looked at them, then slowly dived into the water. Feeling worried, Ken told his mom that he would jump into the river and save his dad, or else Mr. Kang would die from exhaustion. Ken quickly swam to his father. As the two finally swam ashore, he asked his dad what had happened. Filled with horror, Mr. Kang breathed shallowly as he told his son that Tani had been caught by a sea monster. Ken's face instantly changed color. Shortly after that, Mr. Kang's wife asked the villagers to help them find Tani, but their efforts were in vain. Many of the villagers believed that Mr. Kang had brutally killed Tani due to his strong dislike for her, but the family members refused to go with it. However, they still wanted to find out the truth. Mr. Kang stayed quiet for a while, then recounted the tragic incident to them. He and Tani were fishing at the riverbank. As Mr. Kang had been sitting for a long stretch of time, his legs were all numb and tingled. He got up, intending to walk around for a little. Of course, the man didn't forget to caution his granddaughter not to go into the water. Then he turned around and performed some exercises to relax his body. All of a sudden, a loud noise from behind startled him instantly. As he turned around, he saw the water surface slowly rose as it gradually formed the huge mouth in the middle. As Mr. Kang was still in bewilderment, he immediately got shocked to see his grandchild Tani being swallowed into the river. The man screamed loudly, but it was too late. Without hesitation, Mr. Kang quickly jumped into the water looking for his grandchild in panic. He desperately searched for her, but his efforts were in vain. The disappearance of Tani made him feel extremely guilty, as he believed it was entirely his fault for not protecting her. The man also added that the sea monster had returned as it went to the river through an estuary. Being stricken with grief, Mr. Kang's hair turned grey quickly. It's not to say that he had to come under bitter criticism from the villagers, as they believed he was the one that killed the little girl. As time went by, one day his eye suddenly alighted a ray of hope. Unexpectedly, Mr. Kang got out of his house. something that he hadn't been doing for days. He even bought a coil of rope and some iron bars. As the man returned, he instantly went to the warehouse and locked the door tightly. From inside the warehouse, noises of materials clanging on the sound of hands sawing were audibly heard. His wife was really worried about him, as she brought meals to her husband daily, yet the man didn't eat even just a bit. Every afternoon she stood by the warehouse door crying, yet Mr. Kang never came out to see her. It was until the fourth day that the door was finally opened. Mr. Kang slowly walked out of the warehouse. Shortly after that, he assured everyone that he would go to the river and catch the sea monster at all costs. It turned out that for the last few days the man had been making a big hook in order to take his revenge on the monster that killed his beloved granddaughter. His wife instantly stopped him as it was too dangerous, but no matter how hard she tried to do it, Mr. Kang still ignored her and stuck to his plan, as he had nothing to lose now. The man went to a pig pen. He caught the fattest pig in the pigsty, grabbed it by the head and held his knife near the animal's neck, intending to kill it. He was acting like a madman. His wife collapsed on the ground as she saw blood spilling everywhere, while witnessing the violent behavior of her husband. After Mr. Kang slaughtered the pig, he continued to go to the riverbank. Everyone was freaked out. Their faces turned pale as soon as they saw him. It must be the aggressive look on his face that terrified them. Also the bloody pig head, which was pierced with a hook that he was holding, made them filled with horror. Out of curiosity, the villagers followed him to the river as they wanted to know what he was up to. They quickly gathered at the place, talking loudly. Mr. Kang planted a large pole deep into the ground. He wrapped it with a rope, then tossed the hook and the pig head away. The pig head being thrown into the river made the water splash as soon as it touched the surface. In the jostling crowds of inquisitive individuals, some said Mr. Kang had gone crazy, as they didn't believe in the existence of a sea monster in the village. But the man wasn't discouraged by it, as he grabbed the fishing line firmly, waiting for the monster to come out. 1, 2, and then 3 hours had passed, yet nothing happened. People started leaving as they assured themselves Mr. Kang had gone insane. Mr. Kang still patiently waited for the monster. His eyes started to get heavy, then slowly drifted into sleep. But the man couldn't even sleep peacefully as he saw the face of his granddaughter in his dream. Tani was like a little angel with her plump angelic face. The little girl walked closer to her grandfather as she put her tiny hands on Mr. Kang's face, trying to awaken him just like she usually did when he fell asleep during fishing. Mr. Kang quickly got up as he heard Tani calling him. Right that moment, the fishing line suddenly became tight, as if something had been caught on the hook. In the river, waves were seen slowly forming as the water flowed ceaselessly. Knowing the prey had been captured, the old man hurriedly retrieved the fishing line as he felt something moving strongly in the water. The string rubbed against his fingers, causing them to bleed. He tried to lean backwards whilst using his weight to pull the thing out of the river. A painful expression was clearly shown on his face as he frowned and grinded his teeth, yet he still clung onto the string. Realizing how useless it would be if he only used his hands, the man tried to place the fishing line on his shoulder. The great force caused the string to get tightened and cut his shoulder as blood dripped out of his wound. The monster was indeed powerful, as it floundered him with just a single movement. Mr. Kang quickly clung to the wooden pole he had prepared before. But the man himself couldn't fight back the monster on his own. He started trembling with pain as the cut on his shoulder became deeper. In the water, the sea monster was moving its tail violently, but his sheer willpower didn't allow him to give up easily as he continued to fight the monster for the whole night and collapsed later in the morning. At that moment, there were some people walking by. They were in utter shock to see Mr. Kang being badly injured. Both his hands and his shoulder were covered with blood, his face contorted with pain, yet he was still holding the string. Seeing something bizarre in the water,
The two men tried pulling the fish line and instantly felt its tightness. They quickly called the other villagers for help. Indeed, there was something really heavy under the water. Unexpectedly, the thing that Mr. Kang was fighting all night long was a huge fish. The size of its head was even bigger than that of a car. It was at this moment the villagers firmly believed that a monster had taken shelter in their village. As they pulled the monster out of the river, the villagers removed its guts. How terrifying it was! Inside the guts was a human skeleton, which was believed to be of Tani. My grandma sighed deeply, as it was the most haunting part of the story to her, which upset her every time she recounted it. My younger sister was also unhappy with the ending, as Tani had died so pitifully. She asked my grandma if Tani was the same age as her. My grandma smiled as she heard the question from my sister. She nodded her head while saying that Tani was a wonderful little girl, yet had to die such a tragic death. My younger brother said the villagers were just evil, but my sister said it was also evil of the sea monster to kill the girl. I then told the two that the villagers were just as bad as the monster. The three of us had a quarrel over who was the most evil of them all. We kept arguing until our grandmother told us to go to bed, as story time was over. We couldn't even close our eyes as we kept thinking about the tragic story. I asked Grandma if there was any giant fish in the lake behind our house, but the reply to my questions was her loud snores.